ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
It is day 2 of the Australian Open and I'm doing 2 different looks today. So I need to get ready into my second look. I have this gorge jacket. I picked this outfit before I realised that it was like 100 degrees in Melbourne at the moment.
If you've been on social media in the last fortnight, you've probably seen some kind of content from the Australian Open. It might have been an on-court highlight or a viral interview moment, or maybe equally likely, it might have been an influencer detailing their experience or what they're wearing at the so-called Happy Slam. Melbourne Park has seen an influx of social media creators this year discussing everything from the food and drink available to what to wear to the vibes at the event and to, well, the tennis. Why have we seen this increase? What impact is it having on the experience for punters? And is this just the beginning? I'm Poppy Penny and this is ABC Sport Daily. Marnie Vinall is an award-winning journalist with ABC Sport and has spent the better part of the last fortnight at Melbourne Park for the Australian Open. Marnie, having been down there myself this year, one of the main observations is that the place is packed. Numbers-wise, how big has the tournament been this year so far?
Yeah, you're right. It feels like probably one of the main talking points is just the record crowds that we're seeing at the Australian Open. Every single day has seen 100,000 strong go through the gates. That's including the day and night sessions. And even day one of the Australian Open saw over 73,000 people in the day. And that broke the record that was held in 2019 of just 63,000 plus, which was in the middle of the tournament.
Well, there was no question that there was more people coming on the grounds than even we expected, which we have so many things happening here. There was so much great tennis and a lot of people showing up at the same time, and and I think that's indicative of the interest of the event. This was normally a middle weekend for us, and it's unusual that it was the first day for us.
So from the get-go, we just had so many people coming through the gates, and that started all the way back in qualifying week, what the Australian Open marketed as opening week, where you just saw so many people every single day. And a lot of that's got to do with Tennis Australia turning the Australian Open into an event. They want it to not just be about tennis, they want it to be about activities and entertainment. And as so many people have pointed out, brand activations. You can't go anywhere without having so many brands just in your face. And every single day there's so much to do there that it really is almost like a festival type atmosphere.
So for people who aren't at Melbourne Park, I think it's fair to say that content from the Australian Open is nonetheless flooding our social media feeds. And that's not just from Tennis Australia's sort of official channels or the Australian Open's official channels. Why am I seeing so much content in my feed this year compared to previous years?
So Craig Tiley, who is Tennis Australia boss, he said after that record-breaking opening day that, cricket kind of owns December. They want to own January. And part of that is that they want the Australian Open to be not just the place to be, but the place to be seen. And we know that that is part of their strategy because they have gotten a lot of influencers and content creators on board this year. So 200 strong influencers that do a lot with brands and events at the Australian Open. But this year, we've also seen Tennis Australia work with content creators and influencers. There's a content creator lounge within Tennis HQ. This is the first year that we've seen that. And that's a designated space where content creators can edit and collab with each other. And so it's just part of the strategy of making the Australian Open the place of January for everyone to be. And to their credit, they've done a fantastic job because, as you mentioned, I can't open Instagram, TikTok, any app without just being flooded with Australian Open content.
I am heading back to the tennis today with TikTok, and then I have an event this afternoon as well. So I thought I'd show you my outfits.
And I do think it is incredibly important to note that Tennis Australia, why they have engaged with all of these influencers and content creators with increased access to various parts of the tournament and various parts of Melbourne Park, they have not paid anyone, nor have they covered the travel costs. So a lot of brands have, for instance, TikTok has flown a bunch of influencers to Melbourne, put them up in a very fancy hotel, have given them a lot of very premier experiences across Melbourne Park, but Tennis Australia themselves haven't.
Do we have an idea of what kind of content and the volume of content that Tennis Australia or the Australian Open is asking these influencers to create?
So, one thing that I've found very interesting is that Tennis Australia had a reward system with content creators in the week before the Australian Open started, where content creators they could get points based off the quantity of content that they were posting and also the impressions that they got from that content. And then they were put into tiers and they would go into the running to get seats to the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the men's and the women's final. They would also go in the running to go into the AO reserve. There was a lot of perks involved. So they used influencers and content creators to really drum up a lot of hype for the Australian Open in the week leading into the tournament. And we do see some sports content creators creating content about the actual tennis, but for the most part, there's been a lot of influencers and content creators doing outfits of the day or what I'm wearing to the Australian Open and entertainment.
If this isn't giving AO chic, I don't know what is. I am obsessed.
The stuff that they would usually post, but just at Melbourne Park.
Are genuine punters noticing a difference in the vibe of the precinct? What's the mood from tennis fans around this sort of influx of influencers?
So coinciding with the influx of influencers has been fan frustration around what they have called overcrowding at Melbourne Park, because the lines have just been so long to get into matches, to get even entry into Melbourne Park, depending on what day you show up, and then increased ticket prices and increased prices around the precinct. So food, drinks, what have you. And so there is a level of pushback because there's a lot of fans that are seeing, okay, well, there's all of these people that are getting increased access to the tennis, who are getting premier seating to matches, to especially marquee matches, who maybe are just going and taking a lot of photos and then leaving.
Who made the Australian Open some like influencer event? Like I went 3 years ago for the final, mind you, and it was only 3 years ago. There was nothing there. It was just some food and the tennis, like as it should be.
I do want to point out that there's good apples and bad apples in any kind of change in culture like this. Where tennis etiquette is a very specific thing, and then you have an influx of people coming to the tennis that maybe are not aware of that kind of etiquette. And there are some influencers that a lot of fans have pointed out have gone to matches, taken a bunch of photos, sometimes with a particular product, and then they've left without actually watching any of the match. I think that there is an obvious cultural shift that's happening across a lot of sports, not just the Australian Open, but it has really been on show this year at the Australian Open. So a lot of fans have drawn comparisons to spring racing, especially when it comes to how fashion focused the Australian Open seems to be through all of these influencers, and then also the F1. Part of that is that there's a lot of young women that are being used as influencers, and so they're bringing in a lot of other young women to Melbourne Park, which there is a lot of fashion on our feeds. I just think that that is the way that the Australian Open is currently heading.
We obviously can't argue the fact that social media can be a brilliant marketing tool, and brands and the Australian Open have obviously seen maybe a gap in the market for themselves to use social media to bring more people in and potentially a different type of tennis fan, because as you say, there are good apples and bad apples in this too. I'm sure that there are some influencers who are enjoying the tennis. So could this potentially be seen as a way to get new, possibly female fans into a sport where maybe female fans don't feel that comfortable in sport fandom, like we have kind of seen with Formula One, as you mentioned?
Yeah, and I think another really good example is the Kansas City Chiefs and the NFL. I mean, we saw a massive uptick in female audience numbers when Taylor Swift started going to games because she was dating, now engaged to Travis Kelce. And there was a lot of young women who were kind of just enjoying the sugar hit. But there was also some that said, I have never had an access point into this sport before because it is incredibly intimidating. Also, there's a lot of pushback for young women who aren't super fans of a sport to then be talking about a sport they kind of get treated as lesser than. And so through Taylor Swift, they had an access point into this sport. We are seeing similar with the F1, especially with the success of the documentary series Drive to Survive, where even my own TikTok feed is now full of young women talking about the F1. At the moment, a lot of the tennis content that I'm seeing from young women is not just what they're wearing of the day, but even poking fun at not knowing anything about tennis.
I just realised this is like table tennis, and that court is like the big table.
One of the first videos I saw this morning was a young influencer who has a following in the millions, with quotation marks. It's about tennis, it's not about a fashion show. And then it was just a series of her outfits over the tournament. I've seen other content, poking fun at not knowing what juice means, and then a bit of like, hey, I hope Serena Williams wins this year, and almost making fun of the fact that they don't know anything about tennis. So I do think tennis is a little bit of a different case than the F1 or the NFL at the moment, but things take time. And I'm sure that there are some people that are going to the tennis for the first time ever because it is the place to be, or the place to be seen at, and will fall in love with the sport, because I am unbelievably biased. I don't know how you don't fall in love with the sport.
It feels like we are seeing more and more of this kind of thing around big events like this. Even things like the Ashes, we're seeing a lot more content creators involved in marketing and in the media sort of space. Big sport, I think, is seeing this as a way to potentially engage a new or different audience. Do you think that this is kind of the way we're going forward now?
Yes, and I also think that this is something that Tennis Australia is going to have to grapple with, because on the flip side of a new audience coming in is that there's been a lot of fan frustration at the change, particularly this year with the commercialization and the influx of influencers, and feeling like it is becoming increasingly inaccessible for, and I'm putting in quote marks, real fans to actually go and see matches. I talked to one fan for the ABC article that I did on this about how she's really mourning the era of the Australian Open where you could get a ground pass and just bounce around to different matches, and it was more about dressing in team colours than putting on, a bit of a fashion show or making sure that you look good.
I went to the Australian Open yesterday, a Thursday, and oh my god, it was busier than I've ever known it, and we've been going like every year since like 2018 or something. It was crazy. For a Thursday, I don't know. It was insane.
And then you have older fans who aren't really a part of the online culture, and they don't really care for TikTok or Instagram, and they're feeling like, okay, well, I actually can't wait 5 hours in the sun to go and see a match. And then when I do, there's a lack of tennis etiquette because you have all these young people that don't understand the sport talking through points and taking photos, and it is making the experience less enjoyable for a lot of people and a lot of long-time tennis fans. So I think that tennis organizers do have a bit of a dilemma on their hands, because I think that they can give their marketing for this year a huge tick. The numbers speak for themselves, but there has been a lot of widespread fan frustration about how quickly it's changed and how inaccessible it has become for some people.
Marnie, Vinall, it feels like there's plenty more to play out in this space as the tournament goes on, and then as we sort of broaden that picture out to some other big global sporting events. Thanks so much for unpacking it with us today.
Thanks so much, Poppy.
Just before we get to today's headlines, we reached out to Tennis Australia for a comment on this story, and at the time of publishing, we haven't heard back. Headlines, staying with tennis for a moment, and for the first time ever in the Open era, the top 6 seeds in the men's and women's draw have all made it through to the final 8. Iga Swiatek made it through after beating Australian qualifier Maddie Inglis, who has big plans for her winnings.
I'll definitely use a lot of it to invest back into my tennis and, have some people on the road with me to support me and make, some weeks a bit easier. I love shopping, so I'm sure I'll buy something nice. I've wanted a Smeg toaster for so long, but I just was like, no, you can't do that. So I think that's going to be my treat, and maybe the kettle too.
Remember, you can hear the tennis as it happens on the ABC Listen app, or you can keep up with all the latest news on the ABC Sport website. The Australian Winter Olympic team has been finalised and have started arriving in Milano Cortina ahead of the Games getting underway next week. The final members of the team are alpine skiers Phoebe Hayden, Madison Hoffman and Harry Laidler. The 53-strong group of athletes is the second largest Australian Winter Olympics team in history. The 2026 Super Bowl matchup has been confirmed, with the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots set to face off on February 9th, Australian time. And Donald Bradman is still setting records, with a baggy green worn by the legendary batter in the 1947-48 series against India, fetching $460,000 at auction. I'm Poppy Penny and this is ABC Sport Daily. Thanks to Channel 9, Sofa Dofa, Alex Davidson, Ivana Bowell, Mon's Digital Diary, Shauna, and Becky's Booked It on TikTok for the extra audio used in this episode.
Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.